Today we are going to be looking at slope-intercept form. That's going to be on page 74. So in your notebook, you should have your slope-intercept form on the left, and then you should have your examples over here on the right. Okay, so if we are looking at slope-intercept form, that's y equals mx plus b format. So we are now talking about a new way. So y equals mx plus b, right? The beloved formula we've talked about. Students are more familiar with this. Okay, it allows us to do shortcuts. So just like we said a couple days ago, right? Standard form, right, was when x and y were on the same side. We said it wasn't perfect because sometimes we got decimals that we had to approximate. So we need some other options. And y equals mx plus b is another option. Okay, in this format, we are solved for y. And there are two things that we can find when we are in slope-intercept form. We can find the m, which hopefully we already know is the slope. And we can find the b, which is going to be our y-intercept. So we already know that a y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis, but now we are assigning it the letter b. So whenever we see something that asks for b, we should automatically be thinking that that is the y-intercept. Just like when we see m, we should be thinking that that is the slope. Okay, so if we look at this and we want to graph in slope-intercept form, okay, the first thing is we have to be in the right format. Okay, so we're going to have to solve it for y. So if it's not solved for y, we're going to have to solve it for y. Okay, the second thing that we are going to have to do is we are going to have to find our m and our b. So we're going to have to find our slope and our b, which is the, I should say, y-intercept in here, right? We're going to find our m and our b, but our b is our y-intercept. We are going to plot the y-intercept first. Okay, so we're going to plot that b value first. So let's just look at an example here. If we have y equals 4x minus 1, our first thing is to solve for y if necessary. This is already in slope-intercept form, so we don't need to do anything to solve that for y. The second thing that we are going to have to do is find m and b. So standard form, we had to do some work to find the x and y-intercept. Slope-intercept form, we do not need to do any work. So we're literally just pulling it out. So the number that's sitting in front of the x is going to be the m value. So in this case, our m, or our slope, is going to be 4. Our b, or our y-intercept, is going to be -1 because we're taking that sign with it. Right? So this sign is determining that that b is a -1. Okay, so we found our m and we found our b. The next thing that we are going to do is we are going to plot our y-intercept. So our y-intercept, remember, is always on the y-axis. So I'm going to go on my y-axis to -1, and I'm going to make a point. Okay, the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to use the slope to find our rise over our run. Okay, which means we need our slope to be in fraction format. Okay, so if we want our slope to be in fraction format, right now when we look at this, 4 is not a fraction. So we want to decide how can we write it as a fraction to make it be a fraction. Well, if we don't see it over a number, we can always just put it over our over 1. So 4 is going to be our rise and 1 is going to be our run. Okay, so we're now going to go in reverse order of what we did yesterday. So instead of counting how much we rise and run from one point to the other, okay, this is telling us the counts we need to make to get from one point to the next. So we are going to rise 4. So we're going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. Okay, we are then going to plot another point doing that same process. So from this point, we're going to go up 4, over 1, right? We could make as many points as we wanted. We could continue going down 4 over 1, right? We can make as many points as we want, but give yourself enough points to see that line And then just like we did before, we're connecting this with one big long solid line, which doesn't mean a lot yet. It will be more later in the unit. That has arrows on both ends because we know this continues to go on for forever, right? There's an infinite number of solutions. Okay, so let's sort of continue to look at this in some different situations. So let's say we have y equals -3/5 x plus 2. Okay, so our m is what's sitting in front of the x. So our m is going to be -3/5. And our b is going to be the 2. So we are going to start by plotting our y-intercept. So our y-intercept is 2. So I'm going to go up to 2 on my y-axis, right? I'm going on my y-axis to +2. Okay, I now need to do a run of -3. Remember, we said yesterday that if it was negative, that meant we were going down or left. When it's the top number that's negative, that's down, because that's our up and down movement. So I'm going to go down 3, but the 3 is the only number that's negative. That 5 is positive, so I'm going down 3, right 5. And a good way that you can check this is that when we make our second point and draw on our line, we should end up with a downhill line. Okay, pretend that hit those points, but, right? Negative slope is a line that goes downhill. So we should make sure we have a negative slope line, a downhill line. If we look at our next one, y equals -x minus 3. So our m is always what's sitting in front of x. So on this one, right, what do we see in front of x when there's not a number there, right? It's really a 1, so a -1. And our b is -3 because that subtraction is telling us that it's negative. So we're going to start on our y-axis at -3. Okay, our slope is currently not in fraction format. To put that in fraction format, I need to put it over 1. So I'm doing a rise of -1, which means I'm going down 1, right 1. Down 1, right 1, and there is my line. Okay, I'm making that nice long line across my coordinate plane where I'm putting arrows on both ends. Okay, so if we have y equals -4x, we have to be really careful with this one in identifying our m and b correctly. Okay, so our m is always what's in front of the x. So our m on this one is going to be -4. We don't see anything for our b, right? So this really says -4x plus 0. So our b value is going to be 0. So that means we want to start on our y-intercept at 0. Okay, we have -4, so we want to make that into a fraction. So a -4 over 1. So we're going to go down 4, right? -4 is down, right 1. Since this is a negative slope, we better end up with a downhill line. Okay, so when we look at this next problem, we have an interesting little dilemma happening here. This doesn't need to be solved for y. It is solved for y. It's just not in slope-intercept form. So this is reminding ourselves of that rule that says when we divide by 4, we really are dividing in all of the places. So that 4 is really going with both of them. So for this 12 over 4, that's not a problem. That gives us a 3. But if we just leave this as x over 4, we're not seeing that m or that slope in front of the x. So it's important to understand that there's really a 1 there, and that is really a 1/4 x, because we need that 1/4 for slope. So we know that our m is 1/4, and that our b is -3. So when we go to graph this, okay, we can just go through and say we're starting at -3. Our rise is going up 1. Our run is going over 4. So up 1 over 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll do that again. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. And there is our line. Okay, when we look at our next one, we'll notice that it is not solved for y. So if we're not solved for y, we're going to solve it for y first. So hopefully at this point, we're like, oh my gosh, Ms. McKinney, we've done so much solving for y, piece of cake. So if we want to get y by itself, we're moving the x first, which happens to be second in this one. So there's a -2x plus 9. And then we're going to divide by the -3. Now, again, it doesn't matter if you put that x first or not. Just make sure that once you get it solved, you know that your slope is what's in front of x. So our m is the 2/3, and our b is the -3. Okay, so we're going to start at -3, because that's our b. We're going to do a rise of up 2 over 3. Up 2 over 3. And there is our graph. Okay, and then we have one more left. Y equals 3. Oh, this is an interesting one because it's very tempting to say that 3 is our slope, but it is not because m is always what's sitting directly in front of the x. This is our b value. So if this is our b value, what number here is sitting directly in front of the x? Well, we don't see an x at all. So this is really like saying y equals 0x plus 3, which means that our m is going to equal 0. So if we want that as a fraction, that would be 0 over 1. Okay, so I'm going to start on my y-intercept at 3, and then I'm going up 0. So I'm not moving up or down at all, and I'm going over 1. Up 0 over 1. And we have said this multiple times, but whenever we have a y with no x involved, we end up with a horizontal line.